All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are watching the video podcast for the French and Indian War. What you need to have in order to be successful is a pen or a pencil and your notes. As I go through this information, feel free to pause or rewind it to make sure you have accurate information down on your paper. Here we go. What we need to understand is that in the 1700s in North America, there were four major European powers. Remember, these four European powers are here because they want to make money. They want to trade goods, and that's the reason to have colonies. When you look at the map on the left-hand side, you notice that Great Britain, France, Spain, and a little bit of Russia are in the New World. Notice that Great Britain is very close to the Atlantic Ocean. The reason for this is because they want to trade. It's easy to get boats in and out of that area without much of an issue. Also notice that there's an area that is disputed. In fact, there's two areas that are disputed. The one that I really want to focus on is right here. This area is called the Ohio River Valley. The Ohio River Valley was important for a number of reasons. One, it's very close to the Mississippi River. As we talked about before, it's important to get these items out quickly. If you are taking those items from the Ohio River Valley and going to the Atlantic Ocean, it's going to take a very long time. We don't have fast cars, we don't have fast trucks, we don't have fast transportation. If you control the Mississippi River, however, you'd be able to send those items directly down the river, down to the Gulf of Mexico, and out into the Atlantic Ocean. It's going to be much quicker, which means much more money. The second major reason why this area is important is because of the animals. Fur trading was very important and very profitable during the 1700s. There weren't a lot of animals that could be trapped easily in Europe. However, the New World was basically a wilderness, so animals like beavers or rabbits were much more frequent and much more easy to catch. This area had a lot of these animals, and there could be a lot of money by doing the fur trade. The final big reason is because the land was very fertile. And we talked about this before, fertile land is going to give you great crops. So for many people that are very crowded on the East Coast, it's a great place to move and start making items, and start having a farm. We'll talk more about this tomorrow in class. This disputed area is going to create a big problem between the French and the British. Now, a big reason why there's an issue here is because they're both claiming ownership. And when you both claim ownership, there's going to be a complaint about, well, who's the true owner, especially as it becomes more and more populated. Virginia's governor, his name's Dinwiddie, which I think is the greatest name in history. Dinwiddie was very upset that France was there. So he decided to send a very young George Washington over there to tell the French to move, to get off his lands. The French weren't moving, however. They said it was theirs, there's nothing that could be done, and George Washington was quite upset and had to make the long trip back. Again, the transportation was very long. It was actually at the end of 1753, so it was very cold walking back. So Dinwiddie tried to get the French out of there. Didn't happen, so he has to go to Plan B. The Plan B was that he's going to build a fort. He's going to call that Fort Prince George, named after King George II. So he's going to build a fort there, and that's his way of claiming ownership. If I build something there, it must be mine. So he starts to build something there, and he decides that he's going to send reinforcements by sending George Washington over there with 150 men. I know, poor George Washington. He makes that long trip back and forth, back and forth. When George Washington gets there, this is like in modern-day Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when he gets there, he finds that the French have already taken over the fort, and they named it Fort Duquesne. Washington, thinking that he has to defend that land and defend his country, decides that he's going to attack, even though he's outnumbered. He does all right. He is able to take some prisoners, but of course, if you don't have many people, there's not much you can do. So he's eventually forced to retreat. When he retreats, he doesn't completely go away. And the big reason why is because he wants that land. So he goes a little bit far away, he has some hostages, and he creates something called Fort Necessity. So Fort Necessity is pictured here. It's a recreation. You can actually go visit Fort Necessity. Again, it's in that Pittsburgh type area in Pennsylvania. He creates this fort exactly how it sounds because he needs somewhere to stay temporarily. The French come with bigger numbers, they're very upset at this point, and they take over Fort Necessity. So now the colonists have lost Fort Duquesne and they have lost Fort Necessity. This is very upsetting to the colonists. This is very upsetting to Dinwiddie. This is very upsetting to George Washington. And really, this is also very upsetting to England because they're the parent country. They do not like to see their kid getting beat up. So this is the beginning of what we're going to call the French and Indian War. Now, the French and Indian War has a very interesting name, French and Indian War. Now, we might think that the French and Indian War might mean that it's the French versus the Indians. This is incorrect. The actual war pitted the French and the Native Americans against the colonists and the British. Now, some colonists did have Native Americans on their side. However, most Native Americans picked the French. And the reason for that is because the French were nicer to them. When you look at the numbers, let's talk about population first. When you look at the numbers, the British had over 1 million people in the New World. The French had about 80,000. So for most Native Americans, they looked at the British and said, there's our threat. These are the guys that are going to take our land, and they're just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, they're going to take more and more land. So that was pretty upsetting to the Native Americans. Plus, the French were offering better deals, better items to trade, more land. So most of the Native Americans sided with the French. We also need to understand this is a part of something bigger called the 7-Year War. The 7-Year War takes place against the French and the British, and the 7 Years' War has several different locations. It takes place in Europe, it takes place in the ocean, and it takes place in the New World. For the New World, North America, that portion of it is called the French and Indian War. So the names can be very confusing, and the sides can be very confusing, and that's understandable. But we want to make sure that we understand 7 Years' War as well as the French and Indian War. Now, as the war gets going, Ben Franklin, who I'm sure many of you guys know is the guy who flew the kite, Ben Franklin decides that the colonies need to join together. This is completely new. Before this, every colony was different. New Hampshire made laws for New Hampshire, Massachusetts made laws for Massachusetts, New York made laws for New York, and there really wasn't any intermingling. However, Ben Franklin said, we need to unite together, we need to be a united front, and that's the only way we're going to win. So what he decides to do is he decides to accomplish something called the Albany Plan of Union. And this is the first formal time that the colonies are going to try to unite as a group. Now, Ben Franklin proposes, and he had different representatives from different colonies that end up showing up. Ben Franklin proposes that everyone comes together and they are ruled by a council. All the colonies will be ruled by a council, and that council will have the power to collect taxes, make treaties, raise an army, do various things that would bring everyone together. The representatives say, this is a great idea, this will help us win the war, and they say, let's send this back to the states. The states look at this document and say, no way. We want to be separate, we do not want to unite, we'd rather be our individual colonies. And as a result, the Albany Plan of Union dies off. However, it does play a very important role going forward. This is the first formal time that they're uniting. So we're going to see this again during the Revolutionary War, and especially when they start doing things like the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Now, the colonists aren't doing very well. So they talk to the parent and they say, will you help us out? So Great Britain helps out, and they send General Edward Braddock. Braddock brings over a lot of his men, and now it looks like they have a decent chance at winning this war. Braddock and Washington, with roughly 2,000 men, decide they're going to go rush in there, and they're going to take Fort Duquesne back. They're going to take this fort over, and they're going to show them that they can't be bullied around. They take a very long time to get there because the British walk in straight lines. They have very heavy equipment. And they were, for whatever reason, they were carrying a cannon that was very, very heavy. Maybe that was George Braddock's favorite cannon. As they were marching over to take over this fort, they're ambushed, meaning that they are attacked from behind trees in a surprise way, and they are defeated. Only 900 men end up killing 1,000 British soldiers and colonial soldiers. So this is a pretty embarrassing loss for General Braddock and for George Washington. Remember, the British are actually one of the best navies in the world, and their army is actually quite good as well. But they like to fight in open spaces. And that leads us to our next thing, which talks about George Washington. George Washington, during this Battle of Fort Duquesne, had a very interesting role. During the battle, he was almost shot and killed. He was actually shot through his coat at one point. However, George Washington survives, which is very important because he becomes our first president. He survives because Ninja Washington avoids the bullets. That's right, folks. Now, as I talked about before, there are some contrasting styles that we have going on. The British like to wear bright red. Okay? Now, bright red in the woods is going to be very noticeable. The British also like to fight in a straight line in open space. So they like to go into a field, and they like their opponents to stand exactly across from them, and they like to just shoot them. So you have two different parties looking at each other, shooting at each other. Pretty crazy. The Native Americans and the French do things a little bit differently. They wear dark colors, which is better in the woods, and they also use guerrilla tactics, meaning that they are not above surprise attacks. They are not above shooting from trees and behind trees and doing these different things as long as they win. So the contrasting styles is actually a very important part of this war. The British think of themselves as gentlemen. They think of themselves as very proper. The Native Americans and French don't really care. They just want to win. Because they're losing so much, Britain gets very concerned. They want to win. They want to keep their reputation up. They want to beat the French. They want to make sure they can still make money off the colonies. So William Pitt becomes the British Secretary of State in 1757. As the Secretary of State, he makes a big change. He decides he does not want to lose. So what he does is he sends over the nation's best generals. He also starts borrowing money to pay for colonial troops. So now the colonists are getting more generals, which means more training, which means better fighting, and they're also getting money, which means better equipment, better weapons, better chance of winning. Now this changes the flow of the war. By 1759, the British control 6 French forts. So they're reclaiming territory and they're taking more territory. As more time goes on, the British seem very obvious and the colonists seem very obvious that they are going to win this war. The deciding moment happens during the Battle of Quebec. Quebec was the French capital, and the British realized that they must take this over in order to win. Okay, because if you take over the capital, it's very likely that you're going to win the war. So General Wolfe, who is a British general, starts circulating Quebec. For 2 months, he is circulating Quebec saying, where's the weak spot? Where can we get through? Finally, one of his scouts says, we can get up a giant cliff. Now, the problem with fighting Quebec is that it is about 300 feet above everything else. Okay? The other issue is that they have a lot of cannons, they have a lot of protection, they have a lot of fences. It's going to be very difficult to take over Quebec. But General Wolfe says if we go at night and we climb this cliff, then we'll be able to surprise them and take them over. So this is actually a very genius plan. This is actually very different than the plans they were having before. Remember, they wanted to fight in straight lines. Now these British soldiers are getting down and dirty, and they're willing to have a surprise attack as long as it means winning. Quebec is captured. Montreal fell within a year, and the war is soon over. About 1762, Spain actually joins the war on behalf of France, because remember, the Spanish do not like the British. They want the British to lose. Even with Spain joining the French, it's too little too late. The British have already won, and it's going to be very, very positive for the colonists during the treaty agreement. There's General Wolfe. He's very, very sneaky. Now, the last part of this is the Treaty of Paris, because, of course, once you end the war, you have to come up with the agreements. Everyone loses or gets something. France, who is the big loser here, loses all of Canada, most of the empire in India, and all the lands east of the Mississippi River. France loses big time. Spain actually gets a little bit. They get the land west of the Mississippi River. So they actually get some land because they came and helped France. They also get New Orleans, which is very important because there's a lot of ports there, very good for trade. But they lose Florida. So England now controls all of the East Coast. England gets all of French lands in Canada. They get exclusive rights to the Caribbean slave trade, which means that they're going to be making a lot of money off that. And they get commercial dominance in India. So they increase their empire quite a bit, not only in the New World, but in India, which is in Asia as well. So England gets the best stuff here. France gets nothing. And Spain actually ends up getting a decent amount as well. Look at the map here. You look at the map on the left-hand side, which is before the war, there's a lot of purple. When you look afterwards, not a lot of purple. On the left hand, there's not quite so much orange, and the orange increases on the right-hand side. You can also see that Spain solidified a lot of its power in the New World as well. So a lot of changes happens during this time. You also run into something called Pontiac's Rebellion. The colonists are thrilled. They get all this new land that they are thinking they'll be able to move onto. So colonists start moving west. They want the fertile land, they want the good trade, they want the fur. When they move over there, Native Americans start to attack them. Native Americans don't like that they are taking their land, they don't like that they aren't as nice as the French, they just don't like this at all. The Native Americans attacking them is something called Pontiac's Rebellion. The British issue the Proclamation of 1763 to stop this fighting. They're very upset. They just helped the colonists win a war. They just spent a lot of money. They just spent a lot of time. They just spent a lot of resources, a lot of generals, things like that winning this war. And now here you go with the colonists almost getting another war again. So they say, you know what? If the Native Americans and the colonists can't get along, they should be separated. So they say, you colonists, like a parent would, you colonists only on the left side, you colonists can only be on the right side of the Appalachian Mountains. Meanwhile, the Native Americans are going to be on the left side. So to say that again, on the east side is the colonists. On the west side is the Native Americans. This is going to anger the colonists quite a bit. It might lead to something bigger called the Revolutionary War. But folks, that's a story for another time.